away from what I know from our incident responders at my day job. It's significantly more mundane than you ever see on the films. So Hugh Jackman's sitting there at a computer in Swordfish, needing to hack the NSA or something like that in 90 seconds, or he gets his private blown off or whatever like that. It just doesn't happen like that. Healthcare organizations can't afford not to pay the ransom if their systems are out for any long period of time. Even a short period of time when it's an emergency department, people die, right? They cannot, and it's an organization of mostly caring, compassionate people. These people will not withstand that kind of thing happening, so they're kind of more likely to pay the ransoms.
Welcome to today's episode of VR CyberTalks. We are thrilled to have an extraordinary guest joining us, Robin, a passionate security awareness and human risk professional with over a decade of experience in IT and cybersecurity. Robin has spent the last 5 years specializing in educating users on information security best practices, focusing on both the general population and high-risk users such as C-suite, stakeholders, developers, and system admin. Robin is also the founder of SuperSimpleCyber, a platform dedicated to making cybersecurity accessible through informative Instagram content, and the co-host of the Cyber Dudes podcast, where he breaks down complex cyber topics into engaging discussions. Without further ado, let's dive into the conversation and welcome Robin to VR CyberTalks.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Awesome. So I'm excited for the conversation, but let's begin with a little deep dive in your career, right? So let's start with the first question. Could you share your journey into cybersecurity from bartender at Wagon & Horses to the founder of SuperSimpleCyber, and for people who are motivated to pursue cybersecurity as a career?
So you've got a few things from my LinkedIn profile there. That bartending job was a university sort of just little money maker for my own beer money, really. But I left university. I did a physics degree in Nottingham in the UK, and I ended up going into IT consultancy. It's a very small consultancy in London. A lot of it was data center migration. I did a lot of project management work and staff augmentation type stuff. But I ended up on the first big project was to do with data center migration. I got sent out to Bank of America in New York, and that tried on for several years. I actually had a manager at the time who he was getting very much into the DevOps space, and he was like, don't linger around in data because it's boring. And as it would happen, he was both right and wrong, because actually with cloud computing and all of that sort of stuff, the data center stuff really did kick off. But I ended up realizing it wasn't quite for me. I bounced around doing a couple of other projects, and then eventually the company that I worked for got bought out by a much larger group from France who had capability in cybersecurity, and I'd always had some interest in it, but we just never had the capability there as the consultancy that we were at the time. So I took that opportunity to say, I went to the cyber lead in the London office and I said, hey, Florian, can you how do I get into this? And he goes, well, as it happens, we've got more work than we have people to do it, and probably some of the easiest stuff for you to get into is cybersecurity awareness and the teaching aspect that goes around that. And he was right. It's quite non-technical. It was relatively easy to pick up and start teaching the basics because I took to it quite well. And there's a lot of other people who don't necessarily think or find it an easy thing to do. I think Hollywood has built it into this thing that seems very scary and hyper technical, and you've got to be a real egghead to know how to do it. And it's just not true. The difficulty with anything in the governance, regulatory, compliance space is usually the nuance. So as long as you can manage A, people, and B, ambiguity, and try and find out where the balance, where the Goldilocks sort of zone within any one solution versus the problem exists, that's normally where like non-technical people can really thrive. I don't think cybersecurity is necessarily an easy industry to get into at the moment. There's lots of gatekeeping, there's lots of guardrails, there's lots of job descriptions that say entry level but require 3 to 5 years worth of experience, and that is decidedly not entry level. So it's a tricky one. In actual fact, we're going to have in a few weeks, I guess, an old colleague of mine on the Cyber Dudes, who has, after many years working help desk, which is considered kind of a traditional sort of bridging route into cybersecurity, he managed to get a cyber role. And so we're going to be talking about like kind of how he managed to do that, because he had it was quite a struggle for him.
In the latest episode of the Cyber Dudes podcast, you mentioned how employees carelessly input their sensitive data into AI prompts. I'm pretty sure, no, actually I don't. If you could create a PSA on the do's and don'ts of AI usage with examples of mistakes you've witnessed, what would be your top 3 rules?
I was thinking about this last night actually, and I think the first 2 are really quite straightforward and obvious. Number 1 is don't input sensitive data, at least not into anything that is running on somebody else's infrastructure. If it's an AI model on your own machine, and very few people have this at the moment, it will become the norm, I expect. But anything like ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, anything like that goes off to Microsoft or Google or OpenAI's infrastructure, do not put any sensitive data in there, because you have no idea how that is going to bifurcate and how it's going to be replicated, how it's going to be fed into the learning model, and ultimately potentially end up as the answer to somebody else's query. I think the second one is just straight up, do not trust anything that it says 100%. Take everything with a grain of salt. AI, large language models, hallucinate. They make stuff up. They're there. They act a lot like a therapist, actually. Like you can experiment with this yourself. Type in something a little bit controversial, ask whether it's true or whether your feeling is right or something like that, and it will always start off by giving you a validating answer, like, yes, I can see where you're coming with this, or you're right in certain context, but this, that, and the other, right? So it's always, it's basically, don't anger the user. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, sometimes it will just make stuff up in order to satisfy the request. There was a case a year or 2 ago of a lawyer in the States who had tried to use it for case research, and it cited a few precedents for him, a few legal precedents, and he used those, and the judge went, I have no record of this. Like, where did you get this? And it turns out that ChatGPT just made it up, and this guy got an absolute bollocking from the judge. Was like, don't cite precedent that doesn't exist. Like, that is completely untrustworthy. I think the third one's a little bit more difficult, because really those are the 2 like main things. Don't trust explicitly, and don't put in that sensitive data. I would say the third maybe goes into, then I think it's more of a business thing, and it's about hooking in AI tools within your own ecosystem and infrastructure, and ensuring that kind of those tools don't have unfettered access to your and this is more of an identity thing than permissions thing than anything else, but that those tools don't have unfettered access to your ecosystem, because those could end up being a backdoor or a weak point into your own sort of business technology environment. Well, I was on a call with the National Cybersecurity Alliance, is an organization based in DC, a week or two ago, and they were saying something about, there's a stat that keeps getting bandied around that is attributed to them. It's something like 94% of small businesses go out of business after suffering a cyber attack, and they said it's just, and they said they attribute that to us, and we'd never said it. It's just not true. And I think the first place I ever found it coming up was an Australian publication of all things, and I got to it by kind of tracking back through a bunch of different stuff. The starting point of which it was ChatGPT had given it to me, and I go, where did you get this from? But where did they get that from? But where did they get that from? And it goes, and ultimately it ends up just like in a circle. It's just, you can never really, the Australian one was the one that I found that seemed to be the one that referenced others the least, but it's like a recursive kind of loop. They all just reference each other. So somewhere somebody has made it up, and then everybody's just picked it up using a source that cited the source that cited the source as their source, and it's maddening. So they're struggling to get rid of that. But every few years it kind of crops up again, and they have to go, no, we didn't do it. We didn't say it.
That's absolutely hilarious. But yeah, it's out there.
But it's maddening when you're trying to reference like verifiable information, and it's just like around in circles.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's move on. I was personally interested in this question. So you referenced Chris Voss and Die Hard 3 in your podcast. All right, if you could consult on a Hollywood cybersecurity thriller, what are some myths about hacking you'd love to set straight? And I really want to know the answer, so please.
I mean, from what I know, I'm not a deeply technical person, but what I can say from what I know from our incident responders at my day job, it's significantly more mundane than you ever see on the films. So Hugh Jackman's sitting there at a computer in Swordfish, needing to hack the NSA or something like that in 90 seconds, or he gets his privates blown off or whatever like that. It just doesn't happen like that. There might have been a time a couple of decades ago where cybersecurity wasn't necessarily a big thing, and you could kind of pick the digital locks, as it were. But these days it's much more a case of people go threat actors go pickpocketing the digital keys. It's about phishing, stealing a system admin's password, using that, hoping they've not got multi-factor authentication on the account, or if they have, as was the case with an Uber contractor back in 2019, just keep entering that password and keep throwing out the multi-factor authentication prompt so that their phone blows up and just irritate the living daylights out of them, and eventually they'll let you in. And that's unfortunately what happened. So yeah, significantly more mundane than Hollywood gives it credit for, but obviously there's artistic license there. I think the other thing that's kind of adjacent to that as well is whenever we're talking about things like what the government knows or what the government can access, it always comes back to a Will Smith film with Gene Hackman called Enemy of the State, where these guys are in a helicopter doing the hacking on the fly, going, all right, get this stuff from the NSA database, from the CIA, from all that sort of stuff. And those agencies just simply are not that well interconnected, partly by design because they want siloing so that you don't get intelligence leaks and things like that. But they cannot, that kind of information cannot be pulled at will that quickly, that easily. It is just pure Hollywood.
So let's talk about another podcast. In one of
Mhm.
your podcasts, you discussed the fallout from the recent dismantling of net neutrality protections.
Mhm.
How do
Yeah,
you feel about net neutrality being treated as a utility like electricity or water?
it's a really good question. So access to information, everybody should have a base level of freedom of access to information. Now, obviously, in practical terms, for certain people around the world, that's not necessarily available because they don't have access to the physical infrastructure. Talking about the third world, but everybody, the moment you get to a connected computer, you should have pretty much the same. Everybody should expect the same base level of access. Now, if you're particularly wealthy and you want to pay for some extra, you know, speed on that, then that's perfectly fine. No one's gonna. I don't think that's an argument that is particularly easy to contest. But when we talk about from a net neutrality perspective and the dismantling of that, removing that base level of that expectation, that base level of speed and what information you can and can't get, basically at the whims of internet service providers, is to say, well, we are going to throttle stuff that we don't like to fractions of a megabit per second, but all the advertising that we want to push you and the kind of content that you probably aren't necessarily interested in, but we want you to see, is all going to fly at you at 50 to 100 megabits per second. That's a problem, because that then allows telecoms, the heads of telecoms providers, powerful influential business people, to set the agenda and set the tone of what everybody else sees, and it starts moving a little bit George Orwell 1984. And the irony is that a lot of the people, I think, who will have argued against net neutrality are probably also against that big business agenda, but they've got this ideological sort of fight between, pure unfettered free speech and freedom versus versus
an invisible
how does the
hand.
business world also kind of exhibit that as well. I want a completely free market. I want a completely free world for everybody else, but I won't reconcile how these two clash. It doesn't make sense, but
So, like, healthcare organizations have been a frequent target of cyber attacks in the recent years, right? So, based on that, why do you think healthcare organizations are such frequent targets for cyber attacks? That's part one of my question. Also, do you think other industries like finance or marine are better equipped to handle cyber risk compared to healthcare? Why or why not?
I will answer that backwards. I think it's a lot easier for finance because the adage goes, follow the money, right? So they have more money, more resources, they have the people to do it. They also have a very, very obvious thing to protect, which is the money. People have been stealing that for thousands of years. So I think the motivation for them to protect their kingdoms is already there. As I said, they have the means to do it as well. I think when you say marine, I'm interpreting that as kind of like shipping.
Yeah.
I think the seminal moment for that was about 7 or 8 years ago with NotPetya, when some Russian malware targeted at Ukraine brought down an awful lot more companies because it kind of hopped the fence. It got to a shipping giant called Maersk, and they realized then how much they had been ignoring this, because ports all over the world, like shut down. There was one of the main highways past New York called I-95. It's huge. It's one of the main arterial roads in the country, and there was about 5 to 6 miles worth of trucks unable to get into New Jersey port because this cyber attack shut things down. So I think they're probably in a much better place now than they were, because they've realized the kind of immediate acute short-term damage, and then the potential long-term damage that can cause. They almost went out of business. They had one domain controller, one record of everybody who existed in the company and what their access was and who they were, etc. That survived, and that's purely because one office went offline during the attack. And they physically couriered, it was in Ghana, they physically couriered that drive back to London in order to restore it. It was like under armed guard and all of that sort of stuff, because that was a $300 million, I think it was, no, more than that. I think it was a $3 billion company or something like that would just have gone overnight. When it comes to healthcare, I think there's a few reasons. Number one, a lot of the attacks that healthcare get are ransomware. The reason being, healthcare organizations can't afford not to pay the ransom if their systems are out for any long period of time. Even a short period of time when it's an emergency department, people die, right? They cannot, and it's an organization of mostly caring, compassionate people. These people will not withstand that kind of thing happening, so they're kind of more likely to pay the ransoms, I think. Also, the industry has been a little bit behind the curve in terms of adapting to cybersecurity norms and best practices as they've evolved. And there's an awful lot of very sensitive data there. I always say, when it comes down to, and this goes more to the secondary kind of effects or aspects to a ransomware attack, which will be, the first order is, well, let's encrypt your systems, and so you can't use any of them. But then if that doesn't work because you've got backups and you feel that you can restore and you're not going to pay the ransom, then we'll have stolen some data. And if you don't pay the ransom for that, so that we will delete the data, which we might not, if you don't pay the ransom for that, then we will release it out into the open and you will get fines from the regulator. And so you'll have to pay no matter what. You might as well pay us and not deal with the reputational damage that comes from being exposed as not having taken care of your stuff. But I always say to the people whose data it is, and my colleagues who are charged with taking care of that data or protecting that data, is this is not like your financial stuff. It's not like your credit card number that you can change, or your bank account number, or God forbid, your social security number, is as much of a pain as that is to change. This is everything about you that is immutable, right? It's your blood type, it's your diagnoses, it's your date of birth, it's all of that sort of stuff, and that's significantly more valuable on the black market than financial information, because it does persist in that form. It doesn't expire, essentially.
All right. Okay, that makes sense. Because I've been keeping track of news, and it makes sense to hack a telecom provider. It also makes sense to hack the voting systems, which was happening. But I always wondered what it was about healthcare providers and them being a little behind the times when it comes to cybersecurity is something that someone probably cracked out there. So let's move on. We've been talking about your podcasts, but then I also came across one of your articles on LinkedIn. So I had to have a question on that. So, sure. So your article was titled "Prospect Medical Holdings Cyber Attack. The C-suite needs to take more accountability for cyber risks." Why not? Of course.
Mhm.
But the question is, can CEOs and CFOs be held more accountable for cyber risks in their organizations? Do you think a CISO should be part of the C-suite? Why or why not? I mean, I know your answer, but I need,
Mm. Yeah, I absolutely. So I think for a long time, and I think you see this change whenever an organization has gone through a very painful and public attack. You see the role of the CISO like jump up the management tree. Traditionally, what happens is it's kind of stuck as this right-hand man role to the CIO, which invariably places it very firmly within the realms of IT when it comes to everybody else's opinion of what cybersecurity is and does. And to a certain extent, that is partly true, right? There is a huge amount of cybersecurity that is very IT based because it is technology. But the three pillars of any organization's working are people, process, and technology, right? So there's two there that we're completely missing. And people and process, so what's the people pillar of an organization? It's HR, typically, right? That's what you see there. What's the process part? Well, it's probably mostly like operations, right? So it's spat with IT. Like I'll get on a regular basis, my role kind of conflated with I'll get queries that come in and say like, oh, help desk isn't doing this, that, or the other, or there's this problem, and it always turns out to be something that's like service management based or general IT, and I go, okay, I can kind of point you into the right direction of who deals with that, but that is not us. We are cybersecurity risk. If from an organizational perspective you are absolutely compelled not to have the CISO sitting right beneath the CEO along with the CFO, the COO, insert other C roles there. If you're compelled not to have them sitting at that very top level, have them I would say have them sit under chief risk or chief risk and chief compliance, because information security, cybersecurity deals much more with management of risk than it does management of IT. As a function, we are assessors and advisors. Securing the stuff, we will tell you how to secure the stuff. We will bring in help to secure the stuff. We will help you secure the stuff. It is not our responsibility to secure your stuff. As the owner or manager of an application or a suite of systems who use them day in, day out at a deep, intimate level, that is not our responsibility to secure something that you know far more about it than we do. You're the adequate person to, or the ideal person to inform what does and doesn't need to be protected, because that's what you use. It's you care about what you want to protect. You tell us what that is, we'll tell you, and how it's kind of connected to the outside world, or where potentially we will look at where the holes are, but we'll see where the holes are and we'll say, okay, we'll do this, that, and the other to protect it. And then we will help you manage that risk. But there is a massive role that but people on both the business and IT side with regards to technology kind of need to step up with. And I think that does extend as well to the CEO and CFO. I think CEOs need to have a much deeper understanding of, and I'm not saying that they need to be experts, that's the CISO's job, but they need to have a much deeper understanding of the ramifications of the cyber risk in order to be able to divert those resources to cybersecurity where they're needed. If not a deeper understanding, at least a difference of opinion to the CISO, to say, if the CISO says, I really need this, you go, okay, fair enough, take it because this is important. protecting the crown jewels type stuff. When it comes to the CFO, I do think there is a certain amount the CISO needs to do, which is start speaking in dollars and cents, pounds and pence, euros and cents, right? They need to speak financial, talking about things in terms of like vulnerabilities and threats and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't speak the CFO's language, but at the same time, the CFO needs to see that cybersecurity, yes, it doesn't drive revenue. It's not going to be a here is your financial return on investment having made the cyber spend. It is here is your avoidance of massive crippling cost, or here is your peace of mind of avoidance of massive crippling cost were this attack to happen. I always go back, my brain for this always goes back to Futurama, the kind of spin-off from The Simpsons, where one of the lines in one of the episodes is when you do things right, people won't be certain that you've done anything at all. That is cybersecurity. That's how that's supposed to work. If we are doing everything the right kind of way, outside of general awareness training, education, the kind of stuff that I do on a day-to-day, people shouldn't really know that we exist.
I agree, absolutely. But while you were talking, I didn't want to cut you off, but it seemed, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed as if quantifying cyber risks is pretty much it's not like something that you can quantify, can you? It's pretty difficult. Yeah, or can
Good
we?
question. It's a bit there is a bit of a dark art there, and I think that's where it comes down to having the business owners, the executive owners, and the application folks, or your data custodians. You also kind of have to bring in, to a certain extent, competent legal counsel as well, in order to look at how those things will manifest, right? So if this application goes down, or if this function goes down, what is the impact to operations? What's the impact to business? You know, how many widgets can we not make and sell in 4-week period when we are non-operational because of a ransomware attack? What's the impact to business? How much is that going to cost us? $5 million. Okay, well, it's probably worth spending $500,000 to $1 million on some security controls in order to avoid that 5 million potential hit to revenue or profit, whatever it may be, during that potential period, that outage period. That's one way that can be done when you're talking about something, say, for instance, in the healthcare space, or if you're in technology and you've got data of EU subjects and you go and lose a load of stuff and get slapped with a GDPR fine from the European Commission. Oh, well, if that GDPR fine is going to be like 15 million, then maybe we should spend 3 million to, make sure that we are handling EU subjects' data properly, because that's an obvious risk reward. Now, you don't have to do those things. You can fly by the seat of your pants. You can take the risk if you want, and you will save money on the bottom line in the short term. But if that thing does happen, then you're really going to wish that you had done it beforehand. Alternatively, it's going to be your predecessor wishing that you had really done it because you didn't make the 3 million spend and then you buggered off to another job. Because that happens a lot as well. And so I think some of this as well then can extend to kind of like the executive board and the non-executive guys, as to say, well, we're going to be here for a little bit longer, and what's in the best interest of the organization if CFO, CEO, whoever else does decide to hop ship and didn't make that spend in the short term.
We began this conversation from your career, and we're going to end it at your career. So
Okay.
The question is, in your career till date, what's one piece of advice or a lesson that you find yourself going back to no matter how much technology changes, and keep this in mind, this is for people who are pursuing cybersecurity, right?
I think it's an easy one for me to come to because it's what I live and breathe. I think people who are somewhat on the more technical side of cybersecurity can sometimes miss sight of this. Actually, sometimes even I struggle with it myself because it's easy to get bogged down in what you know. Curse of knowledge can be a real crippler for anybody, and what I mean by that is skipping over detail or assuming that somebody else isn't as competent as you are because they don't know the things that you know in your area of like expertise. Equally, you will not know the things that they know about in their area of expertise. Treat everybody as a person at the end of the day. They're not idiots sitting behind a computer screen that can't do a certain thing that you think is really easy and simple. Remember, you live and breathe that every single day. What is obvious to you is not necessarily to them. So I think it's treat every one of those interactions with somebody who is not on our side of the cyber fence as this person's just trying to do a job. They probably have a ton of other stuff on their plate, and this is a problem that they are not familiar with, that they maybe not encountered before, that they just need a little bit more of a helping hand, not somebody to get exasperated with them or, berate them behind closed doors as to, why they can't do X, Y, and Z. At the end of the day, we are all people. The majority of us are just trying to do the best that we can do, and sometimes things that we don't expect trip us up and we get frustrated and maybe don't, we're not as competent with the technology as we otherwise would be with calmer heads. So I think that's it. It's see that people are people.
I think that's great life advice as well. Thank you, Robin. That was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
And with that, we come to the end of our episode. I really want this to go on for another hour, but I know you have other things to do. But this is why I look forward to many more interviews in the future. And till then, we'll have more things to discuss, more trends in cybersecurity as well. And
definitely.
So until then, it's time for us to sign out. And thank you, Robin. This was truly illuminating, and it was very easy to understand as well.
It's good. That's what I hope for. I'm in the business of educating those who don't, like I say, live and breathe this every day. So that's what I aim for. And we do that on the podcast and on the Instagram page as well. So. Yeah.
Well, you have another follower from today. I'm going to be watching all of your podcasts.
Wonderful. Excellent.
Perfect.
Thanks
a lot, Robin. And until next time, we really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot, Robin.
Likewise. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Bye-bye.